And now, coming to the main stage, bringing sexy back to survival, Aaron and Jonathan.
Howdy, and welcome to episode 100 of In the Rabbit Hole's Urban Survival Podcast. In this episode, we mine for digital gold and try to explain what on earth we're doing. We're your hosts, Aaron
and Jonathan.
And you are in the rabbit hole, safe and sound. It's actually, we're going to talk about an alternate currency today that you may or may not have heard about in the news. It's kind of been coming up, and it's been out there for a while. And I know, Jonathan, you and I have both had an interest in the topic for a while, but it's been one of those things. Well, it's like a new technology, and you're looking at it and you're going, this is neat. I don't know if it's going to go anywhere. And for me personally, where I saw it ended up going within the last few weeks was like, how did I not see that? Because what we're talking about here is Bitcoins, and you may have heard of them because of the shenanigans going on in Cyprus with the banks shutting down and everything else. And it brought up the interesting question for, I'm going to assume, a lot of people in Europe, which is, how do you take the money that you have and it's the form that it's already in, that nation's currency, and quickly convert it into something that is easily transportable and relatively secure. And this is in large part why the survival community has always looked at gold and silver. And a lot of Jews during World War II, when they were fleeing Germany, were actually sewing gold into their clothing as they were to escape the country. And so Bitcoins actually offers an interesting solution to that because it's even more portable, especially as all of the countries of the world's borders get more and more locked down for people actually trying to leave the country.
Yeah, the interesting thing for preppers, though, and this is the only thing I would say, and there's a lot of positives and negatives to Bitcoins, and I know that one of the things I've heard in the prepper community is gold is one of those things that people like because it's tangible, it's there, it's physical. If there is an emergency, I can grab it and take it with me. Might be heavy, but I can still carry it. And with Bitcoins, you can do that as long as you have internet connectivity, as long as you have cell phones working, as long as your smartphone's charged. There is no physical thing. And that's, I think, you mentioned earlier, it's like a new technology, a new thing. We've both been looking at it a lot. And I agree. We've looked at it a ton. We've actually both, I think, mentioned it a bunch of times. And every time we see the value go up, we're like, why didn't we do that? And I go back to, well, I think part of it is like that new business or like startup strategist kicks in me. And one of the things I always ask product managers when they've got a new product is, what problem does this solve? And usually you want an answer that says something along the lines of a problem that somebody else isn't solving or other people have created and it isn't solved by really very many other things. And to me, when I look at Bitcoins, I'm intrigued. I find them extremely interesting, which is why I'm thrilled that we're doing this show. Part of me wants to jump in with both feet and be like, I am going to start mining, and we'll explain that in a little bit. I'm going to start using it for purchases and all of that. And then part of me also says, the other part of me jumps in and says, but wait a minute, if I'm going to go spend money on things and money on stupid things or silly things, and remember, this is the part of me that doesn't like Bitcoins. I say I could spend that same money on gold, right? I can go buy gold coins or silver coins or even copper. And at least I can hold these things and they're tangible and I know they have value in the marketplace. Silver, for instance, has a lot of technology value. Even gold has some. So I can hold these things and say, all right, there's value in my hands. I'm clicking them. I'm touching them. They're hard. I can, if I bend them really hard, maybe I'll bend it a little bit.
Don't bend your gold.
But that's kind of, sometimes it's cool to have those little curved coins. But I struggle with it. And I think that's why, I find it so intriguing. And I like the fact that we're having this conversation because I do find Bitcoins to be really interesting thing, especially with all the neat things about them. And I mean, you and I have talked about it a bunch, but maybe people listening don't know. It's a completely unregulated thing, and I love unregulated free markets.
Yeah.
The libertarian in me screams out and says, "This is beautiful."
It tickles my libertarian fancy quite a bit, I must say. It's like somebody's using the whole chicken, not just a feather. It's the whole chicken's right there. And I guess to back up for people that just have no idea what Bitcoins are and you're driving and don't have time to Google it, Bitcoins are a decentralized digital cryptocurrency based on an open source peer-to-peer internet protocol. And while I'd say at least 90% of the audience's eyes just glazed over and were like, what are you talking about? There is, of course, the 10% of the in the rabbit hole horde that are the uber geeky people of the world that actually make things like this work. So to kind of take it down, and this is an extremely technical topic that we're going to try to cover today and hopefully do a good job of bringing it down and explaining it in terms that people that aren't necessarily that techno-savvy get and people that are extremely techno-savvy will enjoy hearing about. Because even when I was, and it's interesting how many people have and have not heard about Bitcoins, because even when I was talking to Ron Davis the other day, who is actually a software developer or engineer or whatever it is exactly he really does in his day job, I was like, hey, what do you know about Bitcoins? He's like, I know nothing, don't ask me. And part of it was he and I were also in the middle of a meeting and he didn't want to kind of lose his train of thought, but it was really, here is somebody that is just completely immersed in the technology world and is a libertarian also, and really just didn't know much about it because it's so new and it's so there's a lot of mystery around it as well. It was developed in 2009 by what is it? Hold on, let me try to read this correctly. Satoshi Nakamoto. But as it turns out, the person that actually released this system out into the wild in 2009, that's a pseudonym. No one really knows the real name or identity of the person who actually invented this. And it is a solution to a problem that people have been trying to solve for a very long time, which is to create a digital form of currency that is hard to hack, is easy to prove transactions, and because of that, it does become very problematic. And surprisingly, the system is peer-to-peer, so there's no, as we were alluding to earlier, there's no central governing body. It's everyone that is involved in the Bitcoin universe is part of the security, and conversely also part of the problem if they get hacked. It's an incredibly complex and incredibly beautiful and amazing thing that somebody managed to finally figure this out, and very strange that, I guess the person that figured this out is probably a cryptographer, so they're used to kind of screwing with people and hiding things, as it were. So,
right. And the people who did get in early were also able to mine a lot of Bitcoins. So, and I'll get into this mining concept in a little bit. I think one of the things that you're going to find, all the listeners are going to find, is we can only touch on so much of the technology here because crypto technology and cryptocurrency is a really interesting topic, and we could probably spend days trying to talk about it, but neither Aaron nor I are cryptographers. Neither one of us are experts in what this actually means from a technology side. We both understand just enough to probably get ourselves into a lot of trouble and probably go down a rabbit hole that we couldn't necessarily explain. So what I would say is if you find this as interesting as we do, it'll be in the show notes, I'm sure, but there's Bitcoin wikis out there. There are probably, at this point, because of the popularity in the media, there are 1,000,001 websites telling you about Bitcoins, the myths of Bitcoins, the realities of Bitcoins. All of that stuff is out there, even down to how they work from a truly technology security perspective. It's all open source. It's all very interesting. If you're interested in it, go do the research. Explain it to the rest of us.
Yeah, and we will. There's a couple of great videos and stuff that I found that do a pretty good job of explaining it in relatively simple terms that we will put in the show notes. And I'll try to provide as much information as we can about it for those that really want to dig into this and explore it. And like I said before, I guess the purpose of the show is just to bring it to people's attention and to have the philosophical debate of, is a digital cryptocurrency the answer to a lot of the problems that are now plaguing gold and silver, which are that it has become very difficult to actually purchase gold and silver on an anonymous basis, at least over the internet. Now, I guess conceivably, if you had a gold or silver dealer that took Bitcoins, you could then actually do an anonymous transaction that way, short of meeting the person in the flesh and handing them the cash and taking back the gold.
And even then, though, Aaron, you'd have to do it in very small quantities because of the way the government regulates that with reporting contexts.
Yeah, it's really interesting. If you buy enough gold, physical gold, it is really quite surprising because I don't remember if it's the Secret Service or the FBI, but men in sunglasses and suits with guns and badges do actually show up and want to know why you're buying so much. I have a good friend of mine is a jeweler, and he doesn't typically deal in a lot of gold jewelry. Most of what he does is he's in Native American and Southwestern art, and so he deals in a lot of turquoise and a lot of silver, but very rarely gold. And he was doing a special project for a client one day, and the project, it was like a very wealthy, very eccentric guy that was giving away these gold dragon statuettes. And I remember my friend was telling me, he was like, yeah, it was the craziest thing. I had to buy like a couple ingots of gold to do this project. And within like 2 days of taking delivery of the gold, I had, as I was saying before, men with suits and guns showing up at my door wanting to know why I was buying so much gold.
And before you even get to that point, you're going to have to deal with the IRS and their documentation and all that. So gold and other precious metals tend to have their downside as well. The IRS has figured out how to tax it all, and they want documentation. That's how they make sure they can tax. But the problem is that when you have documentation, you have people who know what you own, which is one of those things that Bitcoins doesn't have. So like just to kind of throw a couple of really interesting facts about Bitcoins, Aaron mentioned that it's easy to use and they've got these very trackable transactions. They are trackable in the sense that you know they happened. You don't know who it happened with, so they are anonymous. They're irreversible. So the interesting thing is I can't like take your money and then you can't just decide you didn't actually pay me, which apparently is a big issue when it comes to digital currencies. This whole idea of being able to replicate funds, if you will, and then basically hand out fake funds. That isn't possible here because of the cryptography behind it. Now, eventually, will it be possible? Even the Bitcoin guys admit that eventually the cryptography will have to be advanced, even within the Bitcoin, because eventually you will have computers that can just break it. But that's okay, because that's the whole idea behind it. It will evolve as those things evolve.
Yeah, and it's pretty interesting, and they're surprisingly enough, you would have expected that more hacking had occurred, but there's actually, even when I was looking around, there's really only been like maybe a dozen newsworthy kind of events of hacks happening.
Now, to be fair, though, those have been very large.
Yeah, they have been extremely large. I mean, usually in the neighborhood of, from what I saw, it looked like kind of the average is about $250,000.
Right. And the interesting thing about it is nobody knows whether that currency actually was usable or not, because you'd still have to get the user key and things like that. So nobody knows whether. The problem is it's just like having cash in that respect. If your wallet's stolen, you lost that cash. You don't know if somebody ever spent it, but you do know that the cash is gone. And it's the same thing with Bitcoins. You know that your wallet was stolen, quote unquote. You don't know if they ever got into your wallet, but you know it's gone. That is one of the problems with having not trackable currency. It's one of the values of actually a credit card. You know, people talk about credit cards being crap and nobody should use them. Well, that's true unless you want your transaction secured, because the credit card companies do actually do that for you. So there's it's not, I wouldn't even call it a downside per se. It's just a fact that you should understand. Even though it's digital, it's still a thing that can be stolen.
Yeah, and I think along those same lines as we were talking about with cash and credit cards, you know, with a credit card, if you have credit cards, you've probably experienced this once, where something happened and you didn't get the goods that you ordered, or something was goofy, or I mean, you can even do this through PayPal and stuff, is that you issue a complaint and a chargeback happens where the credit card company acts as a referee, and there are a lot of very legitimate reasons and instances where you actually would want to pay for something in a credit card as long as you have the absolute intention of that you are going to pay it off and not incur interest on it. It's that whole rabbit hole there is a discussion for another day that I think we've actually covered several times. But the point being, by using a credit card, you get a referee there. By cash, you don't. It's like you give somebody cash, and if they gave you a sack of basil and you were expecting something else, well, you're out of luck.
Right.
Just to be funny.
I always buy my basil on credit.
You should, just in case it's not actually basil. But and in the same respect, you lose that ability. That is both a plus and a minus of Bitcoins, because as a merchant, if I sell somebody something using Bitcoins, well, they can't do a chargeback, which is it's actually extremely irritating for merchants, because people will do chargebacks for like the strangest reasons. They'll look at their card, their statement, and they'll just say, "Oh, I don't remember spending that," or "I don't know, I don't recognize that name," and they'll just issue a chargeback. They won't bother like actually trying to track down what it was. And I mean, I've done it too. I've looked at my statement and gone, "What on earth is that?" And one of two things happen: either I just the name on the business name is not closely related to the name that they're using for their merchant account, which is always really stupid. And then the other one is, it could have been something that my girlfriend bought. She could have gone to the grocery store or done something, or had some kind of emergency and needed to use that card. And I'm looking at it, and the responsible thing to do is actually look up and figure out where that charge came from before just automatically assuming a chargeback. And the other thing that people don't realize about chargebacks, and the other aggravation for a merchant, is that in most cases, the merchant automatically gets charged $25 every time somebody does a chargeback. So even if they win out, let's say they sold a $100 item, and let's say they're able to prove that it was a legitimate charge, well, you're still out the time and energy it took you to fool with it, but you're also out the $25 just because the person was being goofy and not paying attention, or just being a jerk and didn't want to pay the bill, or whatever it was. So you have that plus and that minus with Bitcoins, of that it's just like cash. Once you pay somebody, it's done. It's you have given them money, and that is the end of the discussion. As an interesting side note, and what I think one of the reasons that it kind of showed up on our radars was because of the we'll say the more nefarious reasons that a cryptocurrency might be interesting, a currency that's fairly hard to track. And yes, for the people that are really aware in the audience, you can track it. I do want to put that caveat out there. It can be eventually tracked, but it's extremely difficult just on its own. And also, if you take the proper measures, and there's tons of information out there that we're not going to try to get into today and explain about masking your IP and doing all kinds of other stuff that would actually make you anonymous. But for the bulk of the initial life of Bitcoins, it's really been used for the internet black market that people may or may not even realize exists. And I don't even remember how we know exists. I just remember one day you calling me up and being like, "We can buy rocket launchers."
Right.
And I was like, "What are you talking about?" "No, we're not. I am not buying rocket launchers. I'm sure we're on enough watch lists as it is. Who are you? I don't know you. I'm hanging up now." But, and then it was, you had found a rather obscure article somewhere where somebody had laid out, like, basically there is like this huge internet black market, and it's pretty much anything is for sale, and they use Bitcoins, which I thought was interesting. And I think it makes perfect sense why that happened the way it did. And that's kind of been the thing of Bitcoins. It's been this kind of toy for people that are interested in that kind of thing, and a tool for people that are interested in buying things that aren't necessarily legal in their area or anywhere in the world for that matter.
Right.
So
that is, I mean, traditionally that is what it was used for. You're seeing a lot of people who are now driving up value. And that's the other thing. It's very difficult to know what a lot of people is. because it is so anonymous, essentially. And because it is unregulated, it's also hard to know what's driving up the value. But at the end of the day, you can make some assumptions that Aaron mentioned it earlier. What's going on in Cyprus? They're basically confiscating wealth. At the same time that was going on, because it was actually a lot of Russian investors who were hurt by that, Russia actually took a step of not allowing transactions of over the equivalent of 10,000 US dollars in cash. They actually stopped, as a country, they issued an order that said you could not do quote unquote cash transactions that were of a value greater than the equivalent of 10,000 US dollars, whatever that is in rubles or Russian currency, which is interesting. And actually, they didn't care whether it was Russian currency or euros or US dollars. It was just a 10,000 US dollar equivalent limit on all of those things.
Well, I think the other thing that Bitcoin solves, as we were kind of alluding to in the beginning, which is, and the history part of it, which is if you go back and watch any country that starts to experience real economic failure, countries automatically do a couple of things. One, with the stroke of a pen, they change the laws, they take your money. Two, they essentially lock down their borders and say, no money may leave the country. None of our currency may leave the country. Forget it. Borders are closed financially. I mean, it has happened every single time in history that a country has started to have like serious economic falter. And I think even Greece was doing that and may even still be doing that.
Right.
So it doesn't have to be as extreme as Cyprus. It can just be as extreme as Greece, where things are just extremely shaky and there's a tremendous amount of uncertainty in the financial market that countries will essentially close their financial borders. They'll be happy to allow money in, they just won't let it out. And that is what Bitcoins offer, is kind of a very slick, slippery, simple, well, I wouldn't necessarily call it simple, unless you know what you're doing, but it is a way to quickly turn your currency, regardless of the nationality, into a digital currency that is weightless and can be moved across borders with extremely little effort.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think that's where it gets interesting. You know, that's the interesting aspects of it, is it's this digital wallet. So if you have, there are cloud versions. So there are cloud versions of this digital wallet, but you can literally, and I mean this quite literally, install it on your cell phone and have a wallet on your cell phone. You can install it on an SD card and have it on that SD card. Those little micro SD cards in a cell phone can have a wallet in them. So it's kind of interesting that it's such a fluid thing that you can take with you and literally take across borders, like Aaron said, or take across. You don't even have to take it across a border. You can spend it anywhere because of the fact that it's digital. If there's an IP address out on the other end, you can spend your Bitcoins there, and that is very intriguing. On the other hand, like, you know, I was saying there's a positive and a negative to all this stuff, and my skeptical side looks at it and says, okay, so I understand how I do actually understand how the value is attained, and maybe we should explain a little bit of that. This might be a good time to try to talk about what the digital miners are and all of that. But basically, Bitcoins are mined, and mining here means they're mined from a cryptographic code. That's why it's a cryptocurrency. And what you do is you have machines, computers, working on breaking these strings of code. And as they break the strings of code, the strings actually get more complex. This goes back to that whole idea that as CPU power increases, it's not necessarily going to get easier to make Bitcoins as long as the CPU power doesn't increase faster than the keys get broken. Hopefully that made sense. But the idea is that computers will be working on breaking these keys, and for every key that you break, you earn bitcoins. Bitcoins. You're basically mining them, and they call that mining. And you can do it right now, and you can actually. I'm sure Aaron will post the article. I think he tweeted it out earlier on how you would do that digital mining of bitcoins. But then you still have the currency being based on a computational function. And that's fine. But again, it's not based on a value that all human beings assign to it. So if you look at gold, for instance, the entire first world, second world, and even most of the third world, I would say probably all the third world, recognizes that gold has X value. It may change and vary by a percentage point here or there, but at the end of the day, gold has an intrinsic value that human beings have essentially assigned to it. And as long as you're anywhere in the civilized world, you can probably spend that gold. On the other hand, Bitcoins don't necessarily have that agreed upon value. So even though it has value to one person, the other person might be looking at you saying, that has no value to me. You cannot buy, if you can't buy food, provisions, housing, healthcare, then the real question is, what value does a Bitcoin really have? So that's kind of where I have my issue with it. And maybe, I don't know if I babbled there, Aaron, but jump in.
I'm sorry, I spaced out for a minute. What were you talking about?
Exactly.
Well, as it turns out, you can buy Alpaca socks on the internet with Bitcoins. And I think that's that's been one of the big boons for Bitcoins. Unfortunately, has been what's going on in Cyprus, where people went, oh, hey, there's a way where we can dump currency and make it weightless and move it across borders or just store it in a safe place where, for all intents and purposes of this discussion, nobody can get to it. And so with that, it has brought Bitcoins into the mainstream media, which means now more and more people are looking at it, and now more and more people are talking about it, and you're listening to a survival show trying to describe it to you. And so as that happens and more people get an interest in it and more people enter into the Bitcoin market and mining operations, you will see more and more merchants start accepting Bitcoins. I can tell you right off the back, like as soon as this recent spike in Bitcoins happened, I immediately started thinking about the different companies that I work with. They all have shopping cart systems, and I was starting to look at all of them like, okay, how do we get ahead of the curve here? How do we start accepting Bitcoins now and be like, the first kids on the block and not be playing catch up down the road? It's a very interesting time, and personally, it's interesting because you look at Bitcoins as going back to the value of them that you were talking about. It's interesting because you look at it, and on one hand, you're thinking, wow, a Bitcoin has gone from a value of essentially 5 cents to I think when I looked earlier, it was like at $140 per Bitcoin. That's a huge increase in an extremely short amount of time. And so the question becomes, is that value being raised because of speculation and because of the sudden boom where you have these countries having economic issues and people are quickly dumping money into the system? So that's raising. So it's very hard to tell. Is this a bubble, or is this the beginning of a real spike in the value? Now the value probably will come down, but at the same time, I mean, we've seen the value just go crazy, and it was really on its way up even before the stuff in Cyprus happened.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it was already. I mean, it jumped from pennies or cents to $10 and something to $40 and something to $80. Now it's also had its crashes, but it has had its share of drops as well. I mean, if you were to look at its trend line right now, it looks like it's all going up. But if you were to actually zoom in on parts of it, you would see that they've had some pretty significant drops. So the question really goes, how do you go about doing this? For those of you listening, I would say it's best to mine your Bitcoins if you can figure out how. I read the instructions, and I'm still not 100% certain I know what I'm doing, and I'm pretty technically inclined. But at the same time, you could buy some, you could try it out, see if you like it, that kind of thing. Maybe the first place to start is to look up who takes Bitcoins. If you just start doing some searches on Google, you'll find out who takes them. If you find stuff that you might want to buy that are interesting with them, you can do some conversions and just try it out and see how you like using it. I would never recommend just jumping in and putting your savings in there. I would not look at this as an investment strategy. It's just personal thing about it. I have a feeling that what's going to eventually happen is, like all things, people in charge, aka governments, will want to regulate this, and they will find ways to regulate it. And by doing so, they will either completely kill it because people run away from it, or it will become part of a standard currency schema. Either way, there's too much uncertainty in my mind to say it's an investment strategy.
Yeah, and just to jump in real quick, actually, the U.S. government, I can't find the news source that I got it from the other day when I was working on these show notes, but the U.S. government already is they're already trying to regulate it. And I think they actually did already pass some law around it, but it was like a very minor law around regulating it. And I guess that does... We'll jump into this for just a second, then we'll get into mining. But this is the interesting part of it, is since it is anonymous and everything else, they will probably eventually they will find a way to regulate it. But for right now, they're trying, and I think the technology is moving so fast, and it is so far outside the scope of what people that are in government, that tend to have an extremely fixed mindset about the universe and the world and everything around them, that this is the way it is, and we're this party and they're that party, or this is how it should be. That it's very hard for them to adapt and really think in new ways and to actually stay ahead of things. And really and truly, we don't want them to stay ahead of this. We'd like them to stay in the dark ages and just kind of ignore it altogether. But that's, the libertarian in me, and I'm sure in you too, John.
Oh, well, yeah, the libertarian in me says all that, and I will take it even a step further. The crazy technologist, futurist in me says that there's actually no way to regulate this at the end of the day. They'll try, and they will make it a painful thing, and they'll figure out how to make sure you're taxed on it. That's really, at the end of the day, the real concern of government, is to make sure they can tax it. And by the way, just so everybody knows, they've already ruled on this. It doesn't matter whether it's Bitcoins or other currency, or apparently lunches that Google provides. If it is income of some kind, it is taxable, and the government wants their share. So keep that in mind if you decide to start taking Bitcoin for product. That is still a sale. It is still a taxable sale as far as the government's concerned. They may not be able to figure out how to do the exchange rates, but they still consider it a sale. So somebody has to figure out how to convert that to dollars and then convert that to taxes into the government. So that's one thing to keep in mind. But like I said, that futurist crazy guy who's looking out the world ahead looks at this and says this can be the potential for an anonymous market regulated, maybe that's the way to say, anonymous market regulated currency that people can use. And if enough people choose to use it and recognize it as having value, then by nature it has value. Kind of like gold. Gold really, while there are some technology values to it at the end of the day, but really at the end of the day, the reason gold has the value it does is that a whole bunch of people around the world all decided it had value. And it was it was just a decision. It's kind of like anything. Why does the US dollar have value? It's not backed by anything real except the might of the government and theoretically the gross domestic product and all that kind of stuff. But at the end of the day, really, it's just a piece of paper. So it has value because we all agree that it has value. If we all come to an agreement that Bitcoins have value and we get critical mass, which I think it's actually starting to hit the beginnings of that, then this is really cool. I mean, like I said, that technologist futurist guy in me says this is really cool. And it proves that there is a way to do digital, anonymous, real-time, secure transactions through electronic media. I'm not sure that this is what a lot of preppers think would be the ultimate in currency, because it isn't physical. It doesn't have a way to survive a blackout. If you really did have some major issues in the infrastructure, the currency would be very difficult to use, if not impossible. So that all said, I would say it's not the best prepping thing, but if you look at it from I think all of us who are preppers are usually also concerned about anonymity and privacy and all that. And from that perspective, this is really neat. I mean,
yeah, it is. It is really neat. And I guess to jump back for a second, as far as like mining and everything else, I think you did a great job of explaining that part of it. And it's the simplest way to do mining. And I've been mining for 2-3 weeks now, just playing with it, seeing what it's like. It's interesting because it's not, you think, oh, okay, so, there's basically, there's 3 ways to get Bitcoins. If you can, if you're a super hacker and you can steal them, then okay, that's one way. But the other 2 more legitimate ways is just like anything, you can buy them with whatever your current currency is. So if it's US dollars, you buy them with US dollars. And then, the original way and the final way is to mine them. And it's essentially you put a piece of software on your computer, and your computer does the work of what Jonathan was describing earlier, breaking down these keys and mining for the Bitcoins. And at that point, your computer is doing the work of contributing to the problem solving that has to go on to basically verify these transactions and to make this whole network work. So basically, you're treating your computer as slave labor. I know. Computers have feelings and rights too, but that is what it is. And your computer basically, the application sits in the background and it works away, chipping and mining on these numbers and everything. And so for so much work you do, you get it's like not even 100th, it's like 1,000th of a point of a Bitcoin, which does have value, and they build up. And the best and easiest way to explain it to anybody, or the easiest way to get involved in it, is to actually join a bit mining pool. So there's like bitminer.com, which is the one that I went to, and I'm not necessarily vouching for them or anything like that. It's just that's the one I pulled out of the air and started playing with. And I did find that their application actually had some issues because I have a bunch of older Mac towers that were just sitting around running parts of my network. And there were isolated drives, and long story. But anyway, so I had all these servers sitting around, and basically they're just kind of sitting around not doing a whole lot on managing our network. And so I was like, well, okay, I can throw a whole bunch of these miners and create a mining pool of my own on these old servers. And the servers were old enough that they actually couldn't handle the software, which was a real shame. And interestingly enough, most of the mining applications for the slightly more geeky people in the audience, the mining application actually, while you can tell it to utilize the actual CPU, the processors on your computer, it really, from what I was able to tell, most of them seem to be designed to use your graphics card. And I'm going to admit I'm not enough of a hardware guy to actually understand why it was better to go with the graphics card than the CPU on your computer.
It just has to do with the way they deal with the encryption algorithms.
Okay, well then,
it's that simple, and to go any more in depth probably wouldn't be worth it, because the people who would get it already get it, and the people who wouldn't still wouldn't.
Exactly. So, and I'm going to claim to be one of those people that wouldn't get it. So, which was funny because, and that was what I was thinking. I was like, well, all of these servers actually have pretty powerful video cards on them, and some of them have 2 and 3 video cards on them, because these are all machines we've retired from other tasks as they've been replaced, and we've put into doing a job that's fairly important but doesn't take a lot of processing power. So there's all these video cards there, and I was like, oh, this is so exciting. I'm gonna have my own mining pool, and man, this is gonna be great. Yeah, it didn't work out so well, but it did work out on the desktop at my office, and I watched it sit there and mine. I will say it did drag my system down quite a bit, and so I found when I actually wanted to be productive at work and not just sit there and watch the gauges and bells and whistles go off on the thing, that I did actually have to pause it while I was doing work. And I bought a pretty decent, rather powerful machine at my office, so that was pretty surprising that it dragged on my system like that. But I guess it is it's chipping away pretty hard at the job it has to do. And so basically you sign up for an account with one of these giant bit mining pools, and you sign up for an account, and you also have to download a digital wallet, which we'll put a link to that in the show notes today. Digital wallet is exactly what it sounds like. It's what stores your Bitcoins, and that can be on your smartphone, that can be on your computer. You can transfer it to an SD card or a compact flash or whatever form of memory storage device that you want to put it on. Oddly enough, I did see something where you could actually print out Bitcoins, but I'm going to admit to say I didn't go down that rabbit hole. I was like, no, I've already spent more time playing with the mining stuff than I really had available this week. So I didn't really get down how you turn it into paper currency. But that is out there. That ability is out there. And so once you've got your wallet, and your wallet has this anonymous long cryptographer looking address, and you sign up for an account with one of these mining groups. You give them the address that you've generated from your wallet to them, and then once you've reached whatever agreed upon amount they've said that they'll pay you out at, they then send Bitcoins or fractions of Bitcoins to your wallet. And that is, in the most simple terms I can possibly come up with, the how you mine Bitcoins. So it's not, if you can use the internet and you're even remotely technologically savvy, it takes a little digging because the tutorials and stuff on it aren't that great that are out there yet. But if you've got a little time to kill and it's something that really interests you, it's not impossible. It's not like you're going to have to go out and learn a programming language or software engineering or anything like that. It's just it does take a little bit of time and energy and research to actually figure out, okay, what are the steps I need to take.
And Aaron, this may be a personal question, but what does the average miner, or what would an average miner, or a miner, not necessarily an average, but a miner earn in a day by mining?
That's actually a good question, and it really depends on the computer. It depends on what other resources of the computer are being used. Basically, I guess the simplest way to put it is, how much processing power does the computer have, and is the computer actually doing anything else? So all of those things, every time you're using a computer while it's trying to mine, you're taking away its ability, some of the ability of that application to do its mining job. Basically thinking of it as like distracting the computer. But I know mine was punching out like 0.0065 or 0.007 Bitcoins per day. That's what the clock on the thing told me it was averaging based on the processing power. So, and I mean, I'm sure there's people out there that have like custom gaming rigs with great big graphics cards on it. Well,
actually, I was going to say there are actually these ASIC Bitminer servers you can buy. You can actually buy specific machines just to mine Bitcoins, and they are not cheap. I mean, they range from $250 to tens of thousands of dollars.
Yeah.
So it's kind of interesting in how that works.
Yeah, and that was Jason McConnell were actually having this discussion the other day, and one of the things we were talking about, which was like, how do you make a business model out of Bitcoin mining and stuff like that? And I did see the machines, what you're talking about with the machines that are specific for it. And I guess the problem comes in, it becomes really kind of difficult, unless you're somebody that really knows what they're doing, to figure out if, buying the machine and the cost of electricity involved in running the machine, if you're kind of, I don't want to say wasting money, but if you're just kind of if at that point you're just spending money on a hobby to watch this thing mine Bitcoins and be like, woo, I've got 10 Bitcoins now in my wallet that I made my computer do, where in the end you actually would have been better off just buying the Bitcoins.
Exactly.
So it's
Believe it or not, there are calculators for it online. You can do some searches. I'm not even going to post one because they're all the calculators that are out there are somehow related to the companies that sell hardware.
Imagine that.
Yeah, exactly. So I don't know about trusting their reliability. But there are payback rates they have in there and all that kind of stuff. I would recommend, if you find those online, do your own calculations.
Well, now, did you happen to look up, so we'll just take the $250 model. Did you happen to see how long it would take that machine to pay you back?
So no, I found a $1,300 model, and they claim at the current bitrate value and the current probability of decline and all the stuff they build in, they claim a 2-day payback.
Oh, wow.
Now, of course, that's assuming a dedicated machine at $1,300. Now, they're also claiming that, your payback time frame for the lifetime of that machine is somewhere around $600,000 US. That's a difficult number to believe. That assumes there won't be any fluctuation in the value of Bitcoins. Right now, it's at a very high level. Again, all the stuff that's going on in the world put it at a very high level. Who knows what's going to happen in a year, 2 years, 3 years, 5 years? It could go up more, or it can completely crater. At which point, you never make back, let's say, your $1,200. Like Aaron said, unless you're looking at it as a hobby and you're willing to throw that money down the drain, I wouldn't go and spend a ton of money on something like that.
Yeah, that's interesting. That's interesting to know. I didn't know those machines were quite that fast, or at least claiming to be quite that fast. And I guess that I mean, if you're somebody that's used to setting up server farms and stuff like that, and you really are willing to invest the money in it, then I guess I could see where there is that business model. You could just set up a small server farm, or even if you do already have a server farm, you just buy the machines and plug them into your system, and then your whatever your cost is, the machines plus the electricity plus your time for fooling with it. But I guess at that point, it really just depends on, do those machines really live up to that? And, as far as exchange rates goes, and as far as everything else involved in actually then turning around and turning that Bitcoin into hard currency, if that is your goal, of course, you could always then, I guess, really become part of the Bitcoin verse, as it were, and just start paying for whatever you want in Bitcoins solely. I mean, that would definitely be an interesting taking that leap and that step into fully embracing this digital currency.
Right.
And I guess it's something that probably is kind of tickling the back of some people's minds of what is the difference between this and PayPal. Well, PayPal actually works in dollars. PayPal's basically like is like a bank account. It's like a charge card. It's just like your debit card. The only difference is it's out there, and you can do a couple of things. Either you can put money in your PayPal account, or you can tie it to a credit card and it draws its funds from your credit card, or you can tie it to your bank account and it just takes money out of your bank account whenever you need it. And so in that sense, all PayPal really is a way to pay online. It's not a form of currency or anything like that.
Yeah, let me try this. And I think that's a good way to do it. PayPal is a transaction engine, really.
Yes.
While Bitcoin is the equivalent of deciding you're going to go invest in, I'm going to throw a random thing out here, but like some random African nation's currency because it happens to be doing well. And the reason I say a random African nation is Bitcoin is not like saying you're investing in euros or US dollars or Canadian dollars or Australian dollars or anything like that, because it doesn't have the track record. And this is why I say it's not an investment decision at this point, at least not in my mind. Somebody else might disagree. It would be significant speculation. It's a currency, but it's a unknown currency right now.
Yeah, and I think the other stipulation to put in there about it is, and we've talked about this a little bit already, but it can and does fluctuate very wildly, and that is both the plus and the minus of having absolutely no regulatory body involved with it. If a bank fails and your funds get wiped out, there's, at least for Americans, there's the FDIC, and you've got so much insurance on money and everything like that. And so at least as long as our game of fiat currency and everything else keeps going, your money's pretty well protected. This is a lot more like throwing your money in the stock market, and this drives me nuts, that people that throw their money in the stock market and have the expectation that their money will grow. I mean, that's, the expectation is that it will grow, but not being willing to take the consequences, which is what happened with all the bailouts, that, well, you are gambling. You are putting money into something with the expectation that it'll go up, but there is just as much of a real chance that it's just going to go bust.
Right.
And I think that's the thing to really understand with Bitcoins. If you really do have to, the funds you put into this, for anybody that does get involved in it that isn't already, the funds you put into this, it really is kind of the Wild West of currency. I mean, there's no protections on it, which is both great and bad. And you don't know what's going to happen tomorrow. You don't know if you're going to get shot in the butt, or if you're going to strike it rich. It's just kind of one of those things. But I think this is something that is, I think, going to be extremely interesting to watch for preppers. It's going to be interesting for the whole world to watch, but I think preppers in particular, because we happen to be preppers, and for the reasons we've sort of laid out here, Bitcoin is going to have an extremely interesting future.
Yeah, I would agree with that. No matter what happens, it's going to be interesting.
Yeah, and I think it was funny. It's in its short life. I think Wired already wrote an article, and it was like 2 years ago, that was titled "The Rise and Fall of Bitcoin," and I guess they were already kind of calling the death of Bitcoin, and it was like, well, not so fast. It's here it is now, and it's huge, or it's quickly gaining a lot of steam and momentum, and gaining a lot of interest. So I think, as far as what is the real value of doing this, and I think to lay it out simply, the real value of Bitcoins is the anonymity. Anonymity. I can't speak today. I'm not going to even try to say it. You get where I'm going with it. The privacy involved in it, that somebody is not able to really watch everything you spend, everything you want to spend, everything you might have purchased, and why. And yeah, there are things out there that maybe, other people don't feel like you should have. But, since Jonathan and I were both libertarians, we're kind of the opinion of, well, you should pretty much have whatever you want, within reason, not other human beings, or children, or anything related to children, of course. But for all intents and purposes, I think you and I are both of the opinion of, it's nobody else's business what you do or don't have.
Exactly.
And as a byproduct of taxation and governments feeling the need to kind of shake you down for every last penny, as it were, these days, they're, of course, also, able to see every last penny that you spend, and kind of ascertain, what you're doing with the money that you're spending. And, I got to be real honest. I get more and more uncomfortable every day with really most people even knowing what I spend my money on. It's nobody's business. Mm-hmm. I think, and I think you, even just talking within your households, your wife or whoever you're financially tied to, it's kind of probably important for them to have an understanding of what you're spending y'all's joint funds on and everything. But other than that, it's nobody else's business. And that's where I've really started to have a real problem with our financial system as a whole. It's so incredibly transparent. I mean, you can, even just doing anything, it's almost trackable. I mean, I think I bought a rifle not too long ago, and even though I did a cash transaction for that, it was still, I could see where if somebody really wanted to figure it out, they could pretty easily figure out what and from whom I bought what I did. And I got to admit, I was really uncomfortable with that. I mean, not current hysteria notwithstanding, we'll say.
I would agree with all of that.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just I get excited about anything that allows me more anonymity in any aspect of my life. And not because I'm doing it, that anybody who says that you don't have to worry about privacy unless you're doing something wrong is kidding themselves. It's just not correct. I believe my privacy is something that is mine. My ability, my right to do what I want and speak freely and openly to my friends, family, and spend freely and openly is again my right. And the choices I make tend to reflect that. I mean, I got all excited recently when I found out that iMessage was difficult to tap. I mean, that's the level of anonymity I'm looking for. So for me, this Bitcoin thing, like I said a couple times, is really exciting. It's really interesting. It's something that I will probably participate in at a relatively low cost by doing some bit mining. It's probably not something that I will go out and buy a ton of currency in. I'll watch it carefully and continue watching it, and hopefully I won't get in too late to make it worthwhile. But at the same time, I'm not necessarily willing to risk personal wealth in order to jump in early.
Yeah, I would agree with that, and I think going forward as preppers, it will be interesting to see what will happen as more and more economies start to fail. Mm-hmm. I think for most people in the community, that's become a pretty widespread expectation that at some point in, I think as little as 2 years and as much as 10 years, most people in the community expect our economic system everywhere from the spectrum of things to be really bad to just a complete and utter collapse. And I'm not going to go along and I don't think it's going to be a complete and utter collapse. I think it's just going to be very ugly. And I think you're going to see I think you're going to see a tremendous amount of countries that have been playing in this kind of really ridiculous credit game that can't pay their bills and are doling out entitlements and using it as hush money. That to kind of just lay my views out there real quick. But I think as you start to see that collapse, and you start to see more and more countries cracking down and really closing their financial borders and not allowing currency out, I think you're going to really start to see Bitcoins really swell. If that does happen, I mean, we could all be out of our freaking gourds and our tinfoil hats could be on too tight today. But I definitely think that's kind of the part I want to see, or I don't want to see that happen, but I want to see how Bitcoins respond as economies start to weaken and as more people become concerned with who's looking at their money, where their money is, and how mobile their money is. So I think with that, we're going to wrap it up. So you've either gotten a pretty good picture of what a Bitcoin is, or you are as confused as a stripper trying to accept Bitcoins. So yeah,
they don't fit in G-strings.
They do not. They do not. We tried just the other day. It was an experience we did on the scene reporting. Unfortunately, they wouldn't allow us to put it on YouTube. But with that, we wrap up episode 100. Thank you for joining us today. Are you part of the solution? Spread the word about preparedness by reviewing In the Rabbit Hole on iTunes. It doesn't just let us know how we're doing. It also tells others the show is worth listening to. Review us today on iTunes. From the Lone Star State, till next time, stay safe and sound.